Today, we're building boxes. If you're into camping and have your own overlanding rig, or maybe even a small car like myself with just the standard roof rack, this is the perfect video for you to build your own set of camping boxes for a lot less than what you can buy them for. So stay tuned and welcome to Maker's Revival. Over the next 3 episodes, I'll take you step by step on how I built these 2 boxes, starting from first materials all the way up and through finishing touches. We'll talk about box construction, fiberglassing, and paint and finish. I'll also share with you where things went right and where things went wrong. So if you decide to build these boxes, they'll turn out even better than what you see here.
Alright, so the first step in most projects is taking measurements. So what you'll see me do here are take those key measurements of my roof rack, and that is both the width and depth of the rack. If you're planning to build this for yourself, you'll want to make sure you measure your rack because it's probably different than mine, and you'll want to make sure you build your boxes to fit your space. So one other constraint that I have is that I want to use materials that I have on hand, and I happen to have this poplar from a previous project that I'd like to use for this to keep the project as cheap as possible. So this is one of those projects where I'm going to build it from what I envision in my mind. Now, I'm not against having plans for projects, particularly for a project for a customer, because you want to make sure you're building it to what they're specifying, but this is for me. And so I just want to build to what I'm envisioning. So this is the only drawing that I'll make of this project. I won't use SketchUp for this. I'm just kind of winging it, essentially. But I am putting down those essential measurements that I have to meet to fit my roof rack and my materials. And the design that I'm going for is a very tactical style box. I'm actually building 2 boxes, and if you're familiar with the Rome brand or Pelican cases, that's kind of the look I'm going for with the chamfered edges and the trim work. And I also want these to be waterproof, but I want to build these for a lot less than you can buy those boxes. So those are all the constraints that I've given myself for this particular build. And I'm just pulling out more materials to use for this project. These are more scraps from a previous project. And now I have the hard job of trying to figure out how to make this work with what I have on hand. Now that I have general measurements for these pieces of wood, I'm just rough cutting them to a general length a bit longer than I need to make them more easy to handle. Now, because I'm using materials that I had on hand, they're not exactly what I need. I actually need square stock for this, and these are 3/4 by 3 inch. So I'm gluing 2 pieces together to make it what I need. If you're buying this outright from the store, you could skip this whole step and the next few steps and actually just buy 2x2 or 3x3 material and start from there. And these are the long sides of the box, and these are the short sides of the box. And I'm gluing all these up just to make the square stock. And I'll just clamp these up nice and tight to set them aside to dry. While the square stock dries, which is essentially the frame of the box, I'm working on the skin of the box, and what I'm using is what you see here, which is 1/4 inch Lauan. You typically would find this in cabinet drawers as the bottom of the drawer, and the reason I'm using this is because it's lightweight and it's cheap. It's roughly $30 for a 4x8 sheet in my area, and it's much cheaper than even plywood. So it's a perfect use for this because it's rigid enough to hold this box together, but it's also lightweight so that these boxes aren't overly heavy. I'm really attempting to maximize the material here and get everything out of one sheet, and I might have pushed it a bit too far. We'll see that here in a few minutes. It ended up working out, but to build 2 boxes, it really would have been better just to go ahead and buy 2 sheets of this. It's cheap enough where that makes more sense, but I really pushed it and ended up cutting these slightly too small. So next step is to pull out my soon-to-be square stock now that it's dry from glue up. So for this next step, I'm just cutting off one side of the pieces to have a nice clean edge to reference off of for my fence. And then I'll move over my fence and cut it to a specified width. And I think I went with something like 1.5 inches. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter, but for my boxes, I went with 1.5 inches square stock for all 6 pieces. Alright, that was a fast transition, but you can see my saw blade is now at 45 degrees, and I'm cutting the square stock into 2 triangle pieces, and then also taking some additional flat stock, which was 3/4 by 3 inch, and cutting off some more triangle pieces. And this will all make sense here shortly, but essentially I'm just trying to reduce weight, and instead of using squares to build a frame, I'm using triangles because they will be chamfered edges. Now that we have the triangle stock, I'm essentially cutting this into mitered edges. If you're familiar with picture frames, if you ever built a picture frame, it's the same concept here. I'm just cutting these at 45-degree angles to make essentially a large picture frame. So the first cut is just to set that first 45-degree angle on the stick. The second cut is where you want to take a measurement and cut it to the correct length to fit the dimensions of your box. I should also note that for all of these cuts in 45s, it's important that the 90-degree angle of your triangle is facing the corner of the miter saw. I'm not gonna lie, this is where things get a little bit confusing, and I spent a lot of time standing there thinking about how to make this work. These are the uprights for the boxes, and I'm putting 3 45-degree angle pieces together to all come together in one corner. And so it took me a while to get here, but essentially you're just cutting that third piece backwards to what you would think you would want to cut it, and kind of back beveling that piece. These are all the pieces you need for the frame of this box. I would recommend pausing the video and just taking account of this, but essentially there's the lower frame, the upper frame, and then the uprights that hold the 2 frames together, essentially making a box without sides. Now I'm taking those frames and gluing and brad nailing those to the Lauan skin. I'm not too worried about it being structurally sound at this point, because eventually the plan is to resin and fiberglass these boxes to make them watertight. And so this is really just the backbone to hold up that resin and fiberglass. And so I'm not spending a lot of time making sure this is perfect joinery or structurally sound. I'm just trying to get these attached. You can kind of tell what I meant by essentially making a picture frame here. It kind of looks like one at this point. And I'll point out this is the top of the box, even though it's laying down. The bigger bevel pieces are actually the top of the box. And this part here that I'm building now with these smaller bevels is the bottom of the box, because in the end, I wanted longer bevels on the front and more shallow bevels on the bottom of the box. And these bevels on the inside of the box really do complicate the build. You don't have to do that. If you wanted to use just straight square stock to build this frame out, it's perfectly okay. I did this just to reduce weight even more because I was trying to make them as light as possible to get these up on my roof rack. but you definitely could just leave these as square stock and not have to go through the pain I went through to make all these weird chamfers and getting those uprights to fit perfectly. Once you have both the upper and lower frames built, it's time to connect those with those uprights. And so I'm just, again, gluing and brad nailing these in place. Not the most structurally sound way to do this, but it's strong enough to get us to where we need to be until we can get that fiberglass installed. And after you get both the top and bottom put on, it's just a matter of taking the leftover skins and gluing and brad nailing those to the sides, both the long and short sides. You'll see here that I have about 1.5 inches on that top section where the skin doesn't cover it, and that's what I was saying by it. I maximized the material, but I pushed it a little bit too hard, and it really made it hard to attach this properly, but I got it done. Now I'm just cutting the outside chamfer of these boxes, which is why it's okay that some of that frame is showing and why I was really trying to maximize material. I'm just making sure that I'm cutting the top of the box, because if I were to cut the huge chamfer at the bottom, it would just cut out the entire frame, which means we'd start over. So I'm making a few different cuts on here and just really kind of pushing the boundaries on how far I'm making this chamfer, because if you remember, the chamfer on the inside of the box matches the same angle we're cutting on the outside, so we left with hopefully about 1/4 inch of material on the corner of that box. And so I'm just trying to push the boundaries a bit, and once I find I get it to where I want it to be, I go ahead and cut the chamfer on the other 3 sides of the box. And then we repeat the same process for the bottom of the box, but with a smaller chamfer, and just making sure that we set the table saw up for that smaller chamfer ahead of time. I had planned on chamfering the upright parts of this box as well, but I couldn't quite figure out how the corners would come together and what that would look like. And so after some research online, I found that most boxes actually had rounded edges on the corners, and so that's what I decided to do with this as well. So because I was trying to maximize material, the Lauan didn't quite reach to the corner of the box, and so what I'm doing here is just filling those corners in with a little bit of body filler. And the reason I chose this is, one, I had it on hand, so it saved me some money, but also I'm planning to use a polyester resin later on to seal this box, and I know that that works well with Bondo, so I'm just using those in combination. Even if you don't run into the same problem I ran into and you use the right amount of material for this box, I would still recommend you go through this step and just fill in all the cracks and crevices. You'll thank yourself later, you'll end up with a better finish, and I think I could have even taken this a bit further in filling those spaces up to have a better finish in the end. And the next step is sanding, and if you're going to do this project, get ready to sand a lot because there's a ton of it that has to take place throughout the entire process. So I'm just doing this initial sanding and making sure those corners are nice and round and my chamfer on top and bottom is nice and flat. Anytime I use an orbital sander, I avoid the corners or edges and I come back and hit those by hand with a piece of sandpaper just to take it easy and make sure I'm getting the finish I want. At this point, you might be asking yourself, how are we going to actually get in these boxes because we just closed them all off? Well, here's how. So I'm just going to cut the lid off the box with the table saw, and I'll hit all four sides one at a time. I didn't have an exact measurement on where I made this cut, but I do know in the back of my mind at this point that I'm going to put a lip on this for a gasket, so I'm making sure it's at least 3/4 of an inch wide at the top of the lid. It's probably closer to about 2 inches, so a nice safe margin of error. And there we have it, a basic box. Kind of looks like a coffin, but it's a start and a great foundation to build off of.
Thanks for watching today, guys. We've only just begun this project and got the great foundation for these boxes, but there's a lot of work to be done. So stay tuned for parts 2 and 3, where I'll take you through the trim work and all the finishing touches of these boxes. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and I'd like to hear your thoughts so far. So leave a comment down below on ways I might improve this, or if you actually take on this project, I'd love to see how you do it and how you improve upon my design. So thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time on Maker's Revival. The hardest part about this is curious people. They want to see what we're doing back here. So, well, I guess it's cool. Makes it hard to record though.